Translator of Viktor, Dörfler, United Kingdom, and Basarab, Zoltán, Hungary, educated for misbehavior in a well-behaved world. Reflective dialogue and 2 years experience of the Transdisciplinary Doctoral School. So, welcome.
Thank you. I cannot find behind the fence, sorry. Zoltán and I prepared this presentation for you today. Based on 4 years of experience with the doctoral school. For 2 years we were developing the concept of the Transdisciplinary Doctoral School in Hungary, and now we have 2 years experience in the implementation. So once we got there, we drew the line, we said, let's sit down and think about how we understand what a PhD is today based on this experience. And obviously one of the ideas was that a PhD is not the Nobel Prize. Actually, sometimes it is. So if you search on Google for the PhD dissertation of John Nash, you will find it. I did. And I took off the cover page and gave it around in a room full of academics, asking them whether they would pass this PhD. Out of 50 people, one said yes, he recognized the dissertation. Why would all the others fail it? Because it was 38 pages, with 2 references only, one to himself and one to his master in a master-apprentice relationship. So nobody would pass that PhD. Anyway, although this is a unique case, we don't need to aim for a PhD, for a Nobel Prize with a PhD. But what we do need to aim for, how is it different from something else? Have you seen the movie 1492 about Columbus discovering the American continent? So, if anyone has seen it, or if you haven't, do you know what was the degree that Columbus held when he went on his journey? He held the highest degree of his time. It was called the baccalaureatus. Try to pronounce it in English, bachelor degree. And what happened then? There were far too many people with bachelor degrees, so we invented a new one, the master's degree. Then there were too many people with master's degrees, so we invented a new one, the PhD, the Doctor of Philosophy. And now there are too many people with PhDs. You see the trend, isn't it? So, what we were trying to figure out is how to position what a PhD would be, and we have found 4 problems to start with. The first one is that the PhD is only necessary for those who want to pursue academic careers, and there is less and less interest in pursuing academic careers. The second is that somehow the PhD got tied to something called journal papers. It is terrible to see when first-year PhD students talk about how to publish in this journal, in that journal, instead of telling the tales, the legends of the great thinkers in their respective fields. And the third one then was that, what was the third? Yes, the third one was what we can call the ubiquity of positivism. Now this is what we heard before, that reductionism is everywhere. It is not just that, reductionism is one aspect of it. It is also this hysteria about being objective. It is also what Basarab calls the logical barbarism. Everything is either true or false, and unless you can prove that it is true, it must be false, and therefore we throw away 90% of what could be interesting about the world. Now, we don't talk about these 3 problems for the reason that they are the same regardless what sort of study you are pursuing. If it is doctorate in physics or whatever else, it is the same. However, we have found only one problem which is specific to a transdisciplinary doctoral school, and that's the problem of teachers. And exploring this problem of teachers, we arrived to some outrageous claims, as you will see. Now, in order to find this delineation, I will show you first something about the bachelor degree, master's degree, and then about the PhD. Now, I will show you a picture. Tell me when you recognize the picture. I will continue talking because it will take some time. So, the bachelor degree needs to be disciplinary. It needs to be discipline-based. And the reason is, finally, okay. So, see what we do in a bachelor degree. We build up the basis. We develop a conceptual framework based on concepts, and the person who is studying for a bachelor degree needs to leave the school with a web of concepts which is dense enough to get orientation within that discipline. Now, who can teach that? Well, in order to teach a concept, it is okay if you understand it. In order to develop the conceptual framework, the web of concepts, that's far beyond that. For that is what we heard before, you need to see the essence. Otherwise, you will not be able to develop the conceptual framework. However, at master's level, which is still discipline-based, things change. What happens is we are using broad brushstrokes to paint rich pictures, and now see how much you need to see of the picture in order to recognize it. So, this time, it is the whole picture emerging at once, and once you recognize it, come on, still nobody, finally. Okay, what is really interesting is that when you build the conceptual framework up from the basics, you need to achieve a very high level of coverage in order to achieve recognition. When you are painting with broad brushstrokes, when everything is becoming visible at the same time, just it is becoming sharper and sharper, after 10% of visibility you can already recognize the picture if you know what it is about. And then we reach the level of the PhD, and contrary to the master's degree and the bachelor degree, which in our view have to be disciplinary, the PhD has to be transdisciplinary. I have to tell you that I have never seen a good PhD dissertation that was not transdisciplinary, regardless whether they knew that it was or not. Now, why it is important that we have discipline-based bachelor and master's degrees? Because you can only transcend what you have. You know the story of the hippies, the children of flower. What happened with the next generation? What they achieved was fantastic. They threw away the values of the parents, they transcended them, they arrived somewhere else, but they did not establish the value system. And the children did not have what to transcend. So what happened? They went back to the values of the grandparents. So we need the discipline in order to be able to transcend it. Not only the particular discipline, as Basarab always emphasizes, but even the concept of the discipline. And this is beautifully depicted by the metaphor of birds in cages. I will not tell you that again, all of you are familiar with it. And what is important here, that what we can do as teachers to help you fly out from the cage. What the teacher needs to do, what they need to understand. They need to deliver what we call meta-knowledge, which means that it is a dense, very dense knowledge. It is not meta-knowledge in the sense of knowledge about knowledge. It is a meta level of the knowledge of the discipline where they are coming from, but they are out of their cages already. They see the essence of their own disciplines, and they can give some meta-knowledge from their own disciplines to those who are engaging in transdisciplinary research, and they might figure out something about it, something from it. And you know, very, very few people are able to deliver meta-knowledge, and that is very much confirmed by our experience in the transdisciplinary doctoral school. So, when we talk about a PhD, a transdisciplinary PhD, we think in terms of the problem-solving process. We base it on Karl Popper, who was labeled a positivist, although he said that he killed positivism. Anyway, when they come, they see some broad problem area, then they start learning about what are those things and its problem area. There is some sort of tentative theory, describes the problem, provides a solution, and they are not happy with it. they find some errors with it, therefore they engage in an error elimination, and what happens then? Then these meta-knowledges are coming in, and what the transdisciplinary doctoral student does, we don't teach them solutions. We just give them some ideas, based on which, using which, some of those that resonate with them, they will create a new way of seeing the problem, which they might be able to solve afterwards. We cannot teach solutions. What we can do is only bootstrapping, so our students will need to do bootstrapping, so they will need to develop their own problems, their own solutions. So like Münchhausen, they will need to drag out themselves from the pond together with the horse. Thank you very much.
Somebody can put
Now present a second statement, Florent, Pasquier and Basarab Nicolescu, presented by Basarab Nicolescu. To be or not to be transdisciplinary, is that a new question?
This talk had to be presented by Florent Pasquier, who is professor at Reader at Sorbonne University and vice president of CIRET. Unfortunately, due to health problem in the family, I have to talk about our common work. So, centuries ago, Hamlet, the famous character, asked himself a similar question. We now have to deal with the actualization of this ontological and fundamental issue, to be and how to be or not to be. The difference is that in those ancient times, humanity could have a long-term vision of their development. The planet Earth was mostly unknown for Europeans. A vision we don't have anymore, as the Anthropocene period will lead to a collapse soon, if humanity doesn't change its beliefs and way of life. Opposite to Shakespeare's time, the world now is a small village through globalization and the existence of all kinds of networks. So, the question still remains valid anywhere on our planet and even in outer space, where some futurologists plan a possible and nonsense human extension. We should try to answer this question by beginning here and now, as what traditional wisdom agrees, that all issues start from the inner self of each human being. So, we have to increase knowledge by conducting research both in human sciences, related to subject, and fundamental sciences, related to objects. For sure, each man tries to be a good human being. But we must not also forget that as we are not alone, we have to learn how to live all together. This brings us to move the question how to be transdisciplinary from just a personal position to a collective and social dimension. It means the whole thing now becomes a question of education's policies. But what kind of education? And which conception of human being? What is our vision of a human being as individual person? So, the aim of our proposal is to consider the human being as the human temple. as schematically seen in the first slide, a well-being in a holistic approach. We consider that there is a deep relation between material aspects to more subtle aspects, and every part depends on the others. One, each newborn human grows in a specific anthropological context, beliefs, cultures, social organization, economy. First pillar deals with the family and social group links. Second one deals with the body. Third one is about feelings and sensibility. Fourth one concerns the mental functions, cognition, mind. Last pillar is about values, axiology, that is the cosmodernist. So, starting from an anthropological dimension to an ontological dimension. Adolf. So, let us now discuss the complex scheme of human temple in an educational context. Each of the above 7 levels include and develop parts of the other 6 levels. We can identify the basic scheme in different fields, as in curricula and disciplines. In this approach, transdisciplinary crosses all levels. So, here is our answer to the question, how to be transdisciplinary. We have to focus simultaneously on scientific knowledge and humanities. And the key for that is consciousness. What kind of pedagogy can we imagine in order to promote this vision? What kind of pedagogy can we use in order to become transdisciplinary in educational policies? We propose a pedagogy called, in the last slide, we propose a pedagogy which is called integrative and implicative. P2I. So, integrative means every form of transmission is useful depending on the moments, on the context. Implicative signals that the pupils are offered situations to become fully actors of the process of their learning. This pedagogy was elaborated according to personal, collective, and social development researches, was experimented. It focuses on the junction of now how to do, now how to be, and now how to become. What kind of consciousness is able to conduct this transdisciplinary pedagogy? We must distinguish natural information, as I said in my opening talk, and spiritual information. And we have to join them through the transdisciplinary methodology. For this, we can use information and communication technologies, but under some conditions. So there is a laboratory in France called COSTEC laboratory, means essentially knowledge, organization, and technical systems at the Technological University of Compiègne in France, where Florent Pasquier is teaching, promotes this approach by questioning methods and processes. Processes are not only objects. This means having a reflection in terms of transdisciplinary approach and not only in terms of disciplines. We have to be very careful about the question of transhumanism. I said that in my opening talk. There is here huge confusion between intelligence and computation abilities. The goal of technontology is the word we create from techno-ontology, is to empower human beings for a better life. In conclusion, a new pedagogy has to include transdisciplinary approach and complex thinking, transdisciplinary consciousness, spirituality, the relation with nature and cosmos, creativity, practice of arts, transpersonal psychology, and soft skills. The use of new technology has to be part of this investigation, as they can increase our awareness, creating a new field called techno-ontologies. This means techniques and ontology. Accent is and. Then we try to apply transdisciplinarity for our personal, collective lives, for a future of hope, fair sharing, and fair sharing on the only planet we collectively need to take care of. So, now, what can we do? In our opinion, we should become members of trans communities. We must cooperate with artists, engineers, scientific researchers, practitioners, educators, every people who are open-minded to the other, to open science and to common good. Thank you.
Our mentor, Dr. Thank you very much for your presentation. We have third place the presentation of Dr. Sanjaya Senadheera. Is that right? Speaking? Sorry, your name is pronounced like that?
Sanjaya.
Sanjaya Senadheera from the United States, being transdisciplinary, an essential approach to create sustainable physical infrastructure for humanity.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, my name is Sanjaya Senadheera, and I actually come from a civil engineering background from Texas Tech University. In addition to my academic duties, I also manage the Transportation Research Center at Texas Tech, which is called Tech MRT, Multidisciplinary Research in Transportation. Perhaps at the end of all this, I need to think about changing that acronym from M to T, perhaps. But I have to admit that I'm kind of a novice to transdisciplinary approach. What I'm going to talk to you about today is not going to involve transdisciplinary theory, but I'm going to tell you kind of some stories and some applications about how I got involved into working with transdisciplinary work and hope to continue to do that. And so it has really been a great conference for me, listening to people from all different disciplines. So I certainly appreciate the organizers for that. Problem. I think that's fine. I think I can work with that. So basically, in civil engineering, we work with physical infrastructure. Now, in physical infrastructure, primarily, we design things that actually will have to last a long time. They have to be durable, but at the same time, they have to provide the service that needs to be done. And so, if you think about transportation infrastructure, which is kind of the field that I'm in, this one actually is essentially to provide mobility to people, to the communities, to the society. And so the way we provide transportation infrastructure in terms of community, in terms of mobility, is to provide mobility to an individual, provide mobility to companies and to communities in general. And you have to also think about the efficiency with which we provide this mobility. And last but not least, sustainability. Now, sustainability, of course, has been around for some time, and I think sustainability in this particular case, of course, involves sustainability in all its different forms. Now, one thing that's unique, I think, about the transportation infrastructure is that we have to think in terms of the natural resources in a big way, and that is already done to some extent, and we have been doing work on that for quite some time. But however, there are other areas in which that we can actually make improvements. So in terms of designing physical infrastructure, the work that I have been doing myself and also my research group, we, from a teaching standpoint, I have been teaching transportation engineering for undergraduate students for a number of years, in teaming up with others. And also I've been teaching about infrastructure systems, both design and operation, the physical infrastructure. And I have also included some research elements in this also from the standpoint of training postgraduate students. And of course we also get undergraduate students involved in our research projects as well, in order for them to get the training that they need for open-ended problem solving, or at least for them to think about that. So, I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So from a typical, let's say, transportation undergraduate project, so if you think about like a highway that you travel on, a particular project of a highway kind of starts with basically an idea, a conception of an idea, and it takes all the way through a couple of stages of design, some reflection, and then ending with the construction, and then you open it up for traffic. Now, if you think about the transdisciplinary aspects of this particular process, the one that I've circled here, they basically the conceptual development, doing the preliminary conceptual designs and thinking about the corridors that's involved. There are a number of different corridors that could be possible in this particular case. So you need to think about those and the possible impacts. So this is an area where I think we spend a lot of time in doing the designs in this case. And so if you think about from the moment of conception of the idea all the way to the construction and opening for traffic, in the United States this may take anywhere from 25 to 30 years in many cases. They have taken some effort to reduce this time, but a lot of it is due to these multiple iterations of work that you have to do, preliminary design, going out some conceptual plans, coming up with the final design, and then going to the public. At each stage you try to get the public involved in the ideas. So this is really the mechanism by which in most cases that the other disciplines are taken care of. Not so much that many disciplines are engaged in this process, but rather it's the engineering profession that kind of drives this, but with some input, limited input. So I think transdisciplinarity is an area where we can make this particular process, I think, improve and make that process much shorter. So that's an example of an area I can actually think of. Now, the other thing, my own research area about physical infrastructure and material resources in general, this is a chart that I actually started using about 10 years ago in one of my classes. I teach a class on sustainable material systems and engineering design. So US Geological Survey came up with this chart from 1900 to 1995, the trends in raw material usage in the United States. And the big area that's shaded in white is construction materials. And so you can see that infrastructure, physical infrastructure, heavy infrastructure is something where we use a lot of our natural resources and creating a lot of impact on the natural world, and on communities in general and the livelihoods of people, health and safety and so on. So this is what really got me to think about how we can provide a better education to both our undergraduates as well as graduate students to try and make their educational experience more multidisciplinary in that sense, or at least to give them some content or opportunities where we could get different disciplines involved. And so industrial ecology is of course an area that has evolved over the years, basically to try and start with the biological organism and try to recreate, which is essentially a circular system, circular cycle, but essentially trying to see how we can recreate something similar to that in an industrial sense. So we can think about that, but it is conceivable for us to think that we're going to need some outside input in terms of energy and perhaps some other material resources. And then what we can do by providing better designs, more efficient designs, more sustainable designs is to minimize the amount of waste that goes into the lithosphere at the end of the service of that project. So I have been kind of looking into the work done by Sanjaya in Finland, and also by Michael Ashby from University of Cambridge, and they have been actually looking at integrating design in the case of Sanjaya, and then Michael Ashby essentially looking at material resources and looking at raw materials, natural resources in a very holistic sense. So those things actually have allowed me to kind of think about materials in a much more broader sense, and I've been trying to get our students engaged in that same way. So over time, with disciplinary, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary approaches, so in transportation infrastructure, we have generally taken a very efficiency, effectiveness, productivity of basic approach since the Second World War for the most part. And but we have not really, in my opinion, we have not really given due consideration to the soft side of things, basically how we interact with the subjective. If you think about the transdisciplinary areas, we have the objective and the subjective. So objective, physical, and this is the perfect example of the physical infrastructure, objects, large objects, and how we look at and how we can come up with mechanisms to interact with the subjective side. And at the moment we have very little that, particularly in the United States. I know Europe is, I think, somewhat ahead of the United States in this regard, particularly from the standpoint of sustainability. But it is an area, I think, that is very important for us to look at. Now, for the last 3.5 years, I've had the privilege and opportunity to work on a research project with the Texas Department of Transportation, working on some innovative material ideas. It's about developing novel material systems for the next generation of pavements. And so here we have had the privilege of being able to look at some ideas that's non-traditional for an agency like TxDOT, looking at things, let's say 10, 20 years down the road, what are the things that they would see. So kind of like trying to look at a crystal ball in some way, not so much the far down the road, because we know that world is changing very, very rapidly, but at least in the context of what we do now, how can we make things better? So we actually, the way we propose the idea is to form 7 different research teams. You see 6 of them here. There are 2 teams within chemical engineering. So we have chemical, mechanical, civil engineering, construction engineering. Within civil we have materials and geotechnical. And then there are 2 boxes. One is construction and value engineering, and then the other one is industrial engineering. I marked them gray because they have to deal with some somewhat subjective determinations after going through some objective analysis and so on. And that is industrial engineering. In case that there is to look at sustainability, environmental sustainability primarily. And in the case of construction engineering, looking at cost-benefit analysis of what we do, which is a very nebulous idea, concept, but nevertheless it's part of the decision-making process. So from that standpoint, we look at, I think, we have had the opportunity to look at transdisciplinarity in that sense, but still you can see the teams, they're all within engineering. We have not really had the opportunity to look beyond that, and that's really something that I would like to see us continue to do, not necessarily in this project, but also in other research, perhaps if we can get students who are interested in moving into that kind of work. So transdisciplinary is something that I started first, listening to, I think, a YouTube video of Professor Marie-Germain, who's a famous physicist, Nobel Prize-winning physicist out of Caltech, who was one of the, I think, 3 co-founders of the Santa Fe Institute in New Mexico. And so he was talking about transdisciplinarity in that particular video and started looking into that, and then came across a very short article written by Professor Nicolescu at the time, and then that kind of gave me an idea, because I knew that complexity science, cybernetics, complexity science have made great inroads, and there's a big role to play for them in this complex world that we have come to be in, and also going to be even more complex. But there are certain things that we cannot really fully model in terms of that concern complexity science, at least in my opinion. So looking, reading that article by Professor Nicolescu, I think, was really enlightening in that sense. So since then, I have been actually reading quite a bit on that over the last couple of years. Professor Etudes, my colleague in mechanical engineering, has really helped me with some literature, and so I've been catching up on that. And so being transdisciplinary, I think, particularly important in the context where we are now getting into a time when we are getting into artificial intelligence, machine learning, things that we have made some significant leaps, particularly over the last few years. It seems like we are trying to get the machines to think like people do, rather than trying to be more deterministic in the way the machine operates, just following instructions. So it is, I think, quite plausible to think that we're going to see more and more of it. We're seeing a lot of it already, but I think it's quite possible to think that we're going to see that now. So in that context, I think most of the procedures that we use these days, particularly in the case of infrastructure that I can talk about, it is important that we set it up in a way that we can develop these interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary approaches by providing these important linkages so that people can start elevating their knowledge to another, basically another platform, higher level. So in terms of what I am doing at the moment from a teaching standpoint, we have had also the opportunity to get involved in a contract with the Ethiopian Ministry of Education to train what they call a homegrown postgraduate program in Ethiopia, and I'm responsible for the transportation education portion of that, is managing that and also advising some of the students. So we are trying to get some of these ideas in place. So hopefully, at a future time, whether it's in the journal or the conference, I'll be able to present some of that work that we're doing. And on the other hand, I'm developing a new course on materials for constructed facilities, and trying to get the ideas of resource utilization in infrastructure and how we can make it more sustainable in all its forms. Okay.
Sorry for the time, but we have 15 minutes now.
Okay. So from a research standpoint, of course, we are looking at transdisciplinarity in terms of using materials